Hey everyone, welcome to our Wednesday Why installment this week. And we're excited you're with us. And if you're joining us maybe for the first time, welcome. All of you that have been with us for what we're doing here at Messiah Nation, we appreciate you, appreciate your support. Thank you for everything that you've been able to help us do. We do want to mention that we do this every week, at least most weeks. Probably 50 out of the 52 weeks. I don't know. Maybe that's a little generous, but we're talking about why we believe what we believe. All right. That it's okay to ask questions if you don't understand something. And I encourage you guys, if I say something that maybe is coming from left field or you don't understand, please feel free to ask questions on the comments or send me a private message and be happy to talk. Tonight, we are going to talk about something that I've heard from Christians a lot. And that is, we are no longer under the law because we are no longer under a tutor. And I want to be specific with this, okay? Because we're going to look at some scriptures and I'll show you what scripture they get that from. But a lot of times what people are misunderstanding is that just because what they are meaning by that, okay, is that the law is done away with. It's not important anymore. It's already been fulfilled. I've heard some of them say, and so we don't need to honor what it says any longer. And so we need to look at this because we need to know, are we under a tutor, right? And where does this come from? And we need to know why we believe that, because I was told that most of my life, you're not under the law, okay? So let's explore this a little bit. And like I said, I'll show you the scripture they get this from. It starts in Galatians chapter 3. Let's look at this verse here, beginning in verse 23. It says, "But before faith came, we were kept in custody under the law, being shut up to the faith, which was later to be revealed. Therefore, the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ, so that we may be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor." Okay, so it tells us that the law became a tutor and that we are now no longer under a tutor. So what people say is we're no longer under the law. So seems pretty clear, right? We do not need to do anything in the law anymore, is what this sounds like from a traditional Christian context of interpreting this verse. But we always have to make sure we're doing a couple things. We have to make sure we're defining terms, and we have to make sure that we are keeping everything in context. And so that's what we want to do with this verse tonight. We want to make sure, is that in fact what this verse is saying in context? Is that what's being communicated here? Or is it perhaps something different? Is there something maybe that takes a little bit of a closer look if we define some terms, and does it mean something different? So we're going to rewind a little bit in Galatians chapter 3. We're going to go back to verse 15, and we're going to see what it says in context here. So it says, "Brethren, I speak in terms of human relations, even though it is only a man's covenant. Yet when it has been ratified, no one sets it aside or adds conditions to it. Now, the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. He does not say, and to seeds, as referring to many, but rather to one, and to your seed, that is Christ." Okay, so here Paul begins to tell him, listen, this covenant was promised to Abraham and to his seed, meaning Yeshua, right? Our Messiah, our Christ, anointed one. And that is something that once it's ratified, it can't be changed. The terms can't be changed. Even more specifically in verse 17, what I am saying is this: the law, which came 430 years later after that promise, right, does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to nullify the promise. Okay, so the promise is not nullified by the law, is what it says. "For if the inheritance is based on law, it is no longer based on a promise. But God has granted it to Abraham by means of a promise. Now, you remember what Hebrews says, that Abraham believed, had faith, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That is what the way it began, right? And in the same way, this promise was given to him. It was not based on the law. And so the promise can't be based on the law. It's got to be based, and the inheritance can't be based on the law. The promise was before the law. So there was already a promise in place before the law was given. That's really important, because this is what that means. That means that the law wasn't given for us to inherit anything, right? And this is really important. This is an important stipulation that you and I understand when we're reading scripture, because people want to say that we believe that we have to keep the law for salvation. That was never the case. The inheritance was never promised based on the law, even all the way back to Abraham, even to Moses, right? None of that. But in the same way that the law did not nullify the promise, we have to keep that thing going. Okay. And let's look at Galatians 3, verse 19. Okay. Now we'll tie all this together here at the end. But why the law then? Okay. And he tells us it was added because of transgressions, right? We understand from the New Testament that sin is the transgression of the law. Okay. That's important for us to know. Having been ordained through angels by the agency of a mediator until the seed would come to whom the promise had been made. Now, a mediator is not for one party only, whereas God is only one. Is the law then contrary to the promise of God? May it never be. Okay, so the law doesn't nullify the promise of God, and the law is not in contradiction to the promise of God. For if a law had been given which was able to impart life, then righteousness would indeed have been based on the law. But that's not, again, that was not the purpose of it. Verse 22, and it told us the purpose, right? The purpose was for us. It was because of transgression. It was because of sin. They were doing what God didn't want them to do, so he had to give them a law. But verse 22, the scripture has shut up everyone under sin so that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. Okay, so very important statement here. What is that statement? Nothing in the law is contrary to the promise, and the law was given because of transgression. So what does that mean? That means that the people were doing a whole bunch of things that Yah didn't want them doing. Yahweh did not want them doing lots of different things. They decided they were going to live a certain way, the way the nations were living. They had come out of Egypt, and he had to give them stipulations to say, I don't want you living that way. All right. So the law was there because of transgression, but it also was not there to take anything away from the promise. Really important stuff. Okay, let's keep going in Galatians then and see what else it says here. In verse 23, this is where we get this context now. But before faith came, we were kept in custody under the law, being shut up to the faith, which was later to be revealed. Therefore, the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ, so that we may be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. Okay, so this is where we end up with this scripture. So hopefully you can see that in the context of this passage, it's not taking anything away from the law. It is not saying there's anything wrong with the law. It's not saying that the law is contrary to the promise. It's not saying that the law nullifies the promise. It's not saying that the law was given to us so that we can inherit a promise. It's not saying that the law has anything to do with that inheritance. So we've got to make sure we understand why it's there. It's there because of transgression. Now, let's define some terms, because this is where we get understanding. What does that word tutor mean? Okay, now this gives us a lot of clarity. The word tutor there is paidagogas, or I've heard some people, if they want to shorten that, they'll say pedagogue. Okay, kind of Englishize it, I guess. But this is what this person was, what this tutor was, and this comes directly. You can go look it up for yourself. out of the Strongs and the Bible study material. And it's very clear. And all you have to do is go look this stuff up. It's very clear. Don't take my word for it. But a tutor was a guardian and a guide of boys among the Greeks and the Romans. The name was applied to trustworthy slaves or servants who were charged with the duty of supervising the life and morals of boys belonging to the better class. And the boys were not allowed to so much as step out of the house without them before arriving at the age of manhood. Okay? So a young boy could not do anything without this guardian in place. All right? And some translations use the word guardian here. But this tutor or this guardian or this schoolmaster, these boys could not do anything without this individual. And the purpose of this individual, notice what the highlighted section says there, was to supervise the life and morals of the boys. Why? Because they were belonging to a better class, and their parents wanted to make sure that they were being raised with the understanding of how they were to behave, what kind of moral compass they were supposed to have, what they were supposed to say, how they were supposed to live, where they were supposed to go. And that trustworthy guardian or that trustworthy servant or tutor was there with that boy every single moment of his life until he reached manhood. Why? To make sure he was guided in the proper way. Okay? Now, take in that definition because this is really, really significant. This is what that word tutor means. All right? So if you look at that, these boys were under the supervision of that tutor until they reached manhood. Okay? In the same way, what this passage is telling us is that we were tutored by the law until we understood the fullness of Messiah. Okay? Now, this is really important, and let's make sure we get this next piece correct because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding of what I'm trying to say here. Okay? The guardian was helping to develop the morals on behalf of the master. That is what the guardian was there to do. So here's a very important question for us to ask. Now that faith has come, now that the person is a man, do they throw out all that training? Is all that training nullified? Is all that morality nullified? Is all of the training that they had received from that pedagogue, is all of that thrown out the window and now they start from nothing and they can do whatever they want? Absolutely not. What sense does that make? That actually doesn't make any sense at all for us to think that way. But yet that's exactly what people say about the law. That now that the law has, now that the faith rather has come, Yeshua has come, there's no need now for the law. But that's not what it says at all. Listen to what it says here in this passage. It's really powerful. It says, therefore the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ. Right? So that we may be justified by faith. Again, remember what it said. There's nothing in the law that nullifies the promise. And in the same way, there's nothing in the promise that nullifies the law. There's nothing in faith that nullifies the law. Why would we get rid of anything that leads us to Christ? That makes absolutely no sense. And so here's where we have to make some differentiation here. Here's where we have to make some distinction. There is nothing that is being said in this passage that tells us to get rid of the law. All it's telling us is that the same way that that promise was given to Abraham, there was a seamless handoff from that promise to the Torah, to the guardian of Torah or the guardian of the law, right? And that handoff was given because the promise that was given to Abraham as his generations came, they walked away from that promise and that understanding. And because of transgressions, they needed to be brought back. So the law was given to hold them until they became a man, or to the fruition of that, as the language is here with that pedagoga. And that's where we are now. And then the law seamlessly hands off the baton to faith in Yeshua, justification by faith, this is another seamless handoff. But in the same way we didn't lose the promise when we transition to the law, we don't lose the law when we transition to faith. We are now upholding the law by faith. Let's look at what Paul teaches about this, because this is where people want to take Paul completely out of context and say crazy things that he never said. But listen to what it says in verse 27 of Romans chapter 3. Where then is boasting? It is excluded. By the kind of law of works? By what kind of law? Of works? No, but by a law of faith. For we maintain that a man is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Okay, no problems there. It's exactly what we were reading with the tutor, right? However, look at verse 29. Or is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles also? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Verse 30. Since indeed God who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith is one. So he's bringing us together as one. Now, here's what's really important, because you read that scripture right there, you read that passage, those few verses, and it starts to sound like, see, we're justified by faith apart from the law. You don't need the law. Well, let's read the following verse, because Paul says, do we then nullify the law through faith? May it never be. On the contrary, because of that faith, we can now establish the law. See, this is something in the modern church we have to come to terms with. All right, get ready for this, because this is a pretty definitive statement. Nothing, let me repeat that, nothing in Scripture gives reason to nullify the law. Nowhere in Scripture does it tell us to nullify the law. As a matter of fact, I quote this on here a lot. Matthew 5:17 through 19 tells us, Yeshua tells us, Jesus tells us that he didn't even come to nullify the law, and that not the smallest part of the law will pass away until heaven and earth pass away. So since those things have not happened, we cannot then take a scripture like Galatians 3 or Romans 3 or these pieces that we want to pull out of context and say, oh, see, we're not any longer under the law. You know what it said? It did say that we're no longer under that tutor of the law. But what is it saying? Because the law has passed us off to Christ, right? The law has passed us off to faith in Yeshua. But remember what it said. Just as the law did not nullify the promise, that faith in Yeshua does not nullify the law. And we've got to make sure we keep these things straight, because we are sharing a faith with people that is not bound to anything, because it's, oh, everything is grace. Everything is, just whatever you feel, whatever your conviction is, whatever the Lord tells you. No, he's already written everything down, ladies and gentlemen, and it's for our good. And so we need to make sure that we are not going the same way that Abraham's descendants did, where we are now transgressing, which is what sin is, a transgression of the law. But by faith, we are now doing what Paul said, and we are establishing the law. We are upholding the law in what we do, because that is what John tells us. That is how we show love to the Father, by keeping his commandments. So that's what I have for you tonight. I hope that made sense to you. I hope it helps you a little bit understand some of these troubling passages sometimes that we take out of context. But I can tell you for sure, are we under a tutor? Are we under the law? No, we are not under those things in the sense of them having authority over us and us being using those things to accomplish righteousness. No, that is only by faith, but faith does not divorce itself from the law. As a matter of fact, faith is what establishes the law. So that's what I got for you tonight. God bless you guys. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on Messiah Nation. Thanks so much.